Dimitri's Descent by Chris Hoppenbrowers, read by The Raw Geek. Dimitri stared out into the pitch-black darkness outside of his bedroom window. It felt unnatural to be here, in this place, so far away from home. With some regret, he thought back to the day he volunteered for a top-secret project at an undisclosed location. When he had first heard those words, undisclosed location, he had assumed the location would be somewhere on Earth. Instead, he now found himself on the far side of the moon. Dr. Dimitri Sheffield, an expert in the field of archaeology, hadn't had a breath of fresh air in 8 months. This, combined with the moon's low gravity, a lack of sunlight, the station's depressing food pastes, and the project's mounting work pressure, had gone so far to affect his physical appearance. He had even started to avoid mirrors, in fear of catching a glimpse of himself, a pale, gaunt carcass of a man, more akin to a ghost than any living being. But the work kept him going. It had to. Dimitri kept reminding the others, and himself, that they were writing history here. Unimaginable discoveries had been made these last few months. Discoveries he had never dared dream of, much less be a part of. When he and the other scientists first arrived here, their excitement had been almost unbearable. But that initial spark of enthusiasm had faded, like a falling star in the night sky. On the morning of his 249th day on the moon, or was it night? It was hard to tell up here. Dimitri boarded the elevator to the excavation site, as he had been doing for the last 248 days. He was joined in the elevator by the other 3 members of his scientific team. Dr. Ian Remington, Dr. Hanako Yutani, and Dr. Wolfgang Whitfield were all experts in their fields, those being paleontology, linguistics, and exobiology respectively. Dimitri glanced at them and for the first time noticed their hollow cheeks and the dark circles under their eyes. It seemed the moon had taken its toll on Earth's best and brightest. As they waited for the elevator to reach the bottom, they went through their schedule for the day, which centered around their latest discovery, a hole of less than 2 meters wide that seemed to go on for several kilometers into the ground. Its edges were most unusual in that they were astonishingly smooth down to a molecular level. Indeed, it was clear that this hole was not a natural formation. But neither could it have been man-made. The hole was drilled, or otherwise created, over 50 million years ago, long before the dawn of the first man. This was one of the few things they had been able to ascertain about their mystifying discovery, and the 4 scientists knew there was much more to be done. The plan, then, was to send more probes down the hole in order to determine how much deeper it went. They had been doing this for the last 14 days, much to Dimitri's growing frustration. At this point, Dimitri started to wonder if the pit even had a bottom, and dreaded what they would find there if it did. "Is it really wise to send more probes down the hole?" Dimitri asked as they went over their plans. The 3 other scientists looked at him questioningly as they waited for him to elaborate. "All probes so far have malfunctioned at a depth of 500 meters. Are we really planning to do the same thing while expecting different results? Are you calling us insane?" asked Dr. Whitfield, pretending to be offended. "Do you have another suggestion?" Dr. Yutani offered. Without much thought, Dimitri blurted out, "We could send a person down there." Then, again without thinking, added, "One of us, perhaps." The others eyed him with concern. "I'm not sure that's wise," said Dr. Remington, clearly echoing the thoughts of the other 2 scientists. Perhaps it was Dimitri's frustration with the project's slow progress, and his eagerness for a breakthrough, that prompted him to volunteer himself, much to the surprise of the others. "I will," he insisted. "I'll do it." The 3 scientists all looked at each other, silently wondering if Dimitri had gone crazy, but they were too tired, too drained to argue. "Well," Dr. Whitfield conceded with a sigh, "if you're really that sure about it." The others offered no protest. Alright, Dr. Sheffield, you're all hooked up and ready to go. The crew member, who had helped him pull on his rappelling harness, performed a final check on the crane, which was normally used for lowering the much lighter probes down the abyssal shaft. But when no alternative had presented itself, Dimitri had once again insisted that he be strapped in. Dimitri took a deep breath. Let's do it then. The three other scientists standing behind the table with monitoring equipment each gave him a nod, and with that, Dimitri disappeared into the depths. Dr. Sheffield, do you read me? Dimitri was startled by the sudden voice in his ear. He'd almost forgotten about the earpiece he was wearing. Yes, Dr. Utani, I hear you loud and clear, he replied. Alright, we're going to accelerate your descent a bit, otherwise we'll be here all day. Dr. Utani sounded tired. Besides, we don't want you down there any longer than necessary. Neither do I, thought Dimitri. Even in the moon's low gravity, he could feel his stomach drop as his descent quickly accelerated. Dr. Utani checked in with him at regular intervals to confirm that their communication was still working, and to notify him of the depth of his descent. 200 meters, 300 meters, 400, 500, 600, 700. Nearing the end of the rope now, she informed Dimitri at 800 meters. If we lose communication, just... The rest was inaudible. I'll just tug the rope and you'll pull me back up, Dimitri said to himself. After plummeting what was probably a few hundred meters more, he jerked to a sudden halt. That's the end of the rope, Dimitri said out loud. He wasn't sure why he suddenly felt the need to narrate. He could almost convince himself that he was doing it for the recording device on his arm, or in the small hope that Dr. Utani and the others could still hear him, but secretly he knew. He simply wished to break the unsettling silence that commanded this deep and dark void. Alright, let's have some light, he said as he turned on the small lamp on his helmet. Dimitri slowly rotated it on the rope to inspect all sides of the tunnel. Only now did it occur to him how narrow the tunnel really was. If he got stuck somehow, there was no way for anyone to help him out. He desperately tried to dismiss the thought and focus on his work. Not much to see here, just more smooth black surfaces and... Hold on, there's some scratches here. Did I do that just now? No, they're not scratches, it appears to be some sort of writing. Dr. Utani, if you're hearing this, prepare to make history. You're going to have a field day with this. I'll be sure to get some pictures for you. Dimitri, fully aware that he was suspended above unknown heights, carefully produced his camera from the pouch on his belt when the lamp on his helmet suddenly went out. This is not just probes that end up malfunctioning down here. It's too dark now to take a photo, but... Dimitri reached into another pouch and carefully took out a pencil and a piece of paper. I'll make a copy of the etchings for you, Dr. Utani. You can thank me when I come back up. He placed the piece of paper over the etchings and proceeded to rub it with the pencil. Copying all of the writing took longer than he would have liked. It wasn't easy to find some of the small markings in the pitch-black darkness, so the work was tedious and fiddly. Yet the soft scratching on the pencil had a soothing quality to it. It managed to chase away the silence and took his mind off the endless depths beneath him. By the time Dimitri was done with his task, he'd gotten so used to the sound of the scratching pencil that it still lingered in his head. A welcome reprieve from the unnerving silence, he thought, until he realized two things. It wasn't in his head, and it wasn't scratching. They were whispers. Overcome by a sudden and severe dread, Dimitri frantically jerked on the rope. There was no response. As Dimitri kept tugging on the rope, the whispers grew louder, or perhaps they were getting closer. Dimitri started yelling up the shaft. Pull me up! Get me out of here, please! He swore he heard laughter coming from down below. As Dimitri's heart was beating in his chest and his stomach started to turn inside out, he tried climbing up the rope in a panic. Finally, he felt the sweet release of slowly being lifted up towards the surface. Faster! Please go faster! He pleaded the moment communication was restored. What's going on, Dr. Sheffield? Dr. Whitfield's voice was music to Dimitri's ears. I don't know, he replied. Just get me back up. Later that day, Dimitri returned to his private quarters and plumped down on the bed, exhausted. He hadn't told anyone about the whispers in the dark for fear of being mocked, or worse, being declared mentally unfit. He had already played back the audio tape from his recorder on the way back to his quarters, and was unable to discern any unusual sounds. This either meant the whispers were on a wavelength that couldn't be picked up by a microphone, or he was indeed going insane. He wasn't sure which was scarier. He had, however, showed Dr. Yutani the etchings he had copied, much to her delight and gratitude. It appeared the writing consisted of one word repeated over and over. Thanks to some earlier linguistic discoveries made at other lunar sites, Dr. Yutani was able to create a rough translation of the word, or rather something that approximated its meaning. Punishment for the wicked or curious. As people of science, they had all agreed how disturbing it was that, to the civilization that came up with this word, curiosity was a concept to be closely associated with wickedness, something to be punished. As he contemplated the day's events, Dmitri quickly fell asleep. He couldn't wait to go back home. He awoke later that night, startled by the sounds of loud whispering, and switched on the light next to his bed. It wasn't working, and his eyes hadn't yet gotten used to the dark, so he instead listened intently. The whispers had stopped. All he heard now was the soft, familiar buzzing of a ceiling lamp. Dmitri wondered how the light could be on if his room was still shrouded in darkness. He rubbed the hills of his hands against his eyes, trying hopelessly to rub the blackness out of them. His befuddlement slowly turned to horror as he came to the terrifying realization that he had gone blind. Panicking, Dmitri stumbled out of bed, felt his bare feet touch the cold floor, and quickly, but carefully, made his way to the door. He searched for the handle, opened the door, and stumbled into the hallway. "Help!" he stammered. "Somebody help!" No one answered. He continued into the common area of the base, which he knew to be consistently occupied by crew members returning from their shifts. Is anyone here?" he asked, and waited. Again there was no response, but as he listened closer, he noticed another presence in the room. He could hear them breathing. "Hello? Can you hear me?" he tried again. "I can't see. I think I'm blind." The breathing became heavier, but there was no reply. Without knowing what came over him, Dmitri yelled out in frustration and fear, stomping his feet like a frustrated child. "Please help me!" The breathing suddenly stopped and changed into a deeply unsettling guttural sound. Fear slowly started to take hold of Dmitri. Just when he was about to turn around and run into the hallway, the guttural noise faded into what sounded like a dying breath. Held back by doubt, but compelled by curiosity, he approached the source of the sound. He reached out his hand, but no one was there. Dmitri was both perplexed and overcome by a frightful panic. He felt like he was going mad. Nothing made sense. He just wanted to leave this nightmare and go home. But home was a million miles away. He knew he was alone here, and no one would be coming to help him. It was then that he heard the voices again whispering to him. As the murmurs grew louder, Dmitri was almost able to make out individual words in a language wholly unknown to him, or any other man. Its harsh consonants and unearthly vowels chilled him to the bone. Dmitri covered his ears to make it stop, but the nameless voices only grew more incessant, hounding him, compelling him to listen, until he understood the meanings of their words. "This is how you die." Dmitri tried to scream, but there was no sound. He reached for his throat and felt his skin peel away. "Dr. Sheffield? Come in, Dr. Sheffield!" Dmitri was suddenly startled by the voice in his earpiece. He didn't realize where he was, until he noticed he was suspended in the air. He was still inside the hole. Had he been dreaming? As he ascended the shaft, he wondered which part had been a dream and what had been reality. It all felt the same to him. He quickly searched his pouch and found the etchings he had made. Everything that had occurred after he copied the notes must have been some kind of hallucination, he concluded, possibly caused by a gas or an unfamiliar type of radiation. The three scientists all looked at him eagerly as he climbed out of the hole. "Well, did you find anything down there?" Dr. Whitfield asked. "All we heard was static." "I have something that might interest Dr. Yutani," Dmitri said with a smile, trying to hide his anxiety. With a trembling hand, he produced the etchings from his pouch. "What's this?" Dr. Yutani asked as she carefully accepted the notes. "More writing from the strangers?" She studied the letters, hemming and hawing. "It's just one word repeated over and over. I need to cross-reference with the data list findings, but at first glance it seems to be about abuse or torture. Or punishment, added Dmitri, a fearful realization in his voice. Well, yes, replied Dr. Yutani. She looked at Dmitri with bewilderment, more surprised and impressed by his linguistic knowledge. Punishment for the wicked or curious, Dmitri said, his eyes wide with fear. Dr. Remington looked at the others in confusion, then at Dmitri. How did you know? Dmitri snapped back to reality. We've had this conversation before. Is it possible you're having deja vu? Asked Dr. Remington. No, Dmitri replied. I'm sure. I remembered what those writings meant, he said, as he frantically pointed at the notes Dr. Yutani was holding. Are you saying you've seen what exactly, the future? Dr. Whitfield asked. He sounded incredulous. Dmitri's shoulders slumped as his gaze dropped to the floor. Yes, I think so. There was a long silence, and he didn't dare guess what the others thought of him. Well, if you saw the future, what happens next? Dr. Remington asked with some trepidation. Dmitri tried to find the words. I'll go to sleep, and when I wake tomorrow, I'll be blind, and everyone else will be gone. I'm going to die here alone. The other scientists quietly glanced at each other. Dr. Yutani was the first to speak. I'm sure it won't play out like that. Her words were meant to be comforting, but lacked conviction. It was probably some kind of hallucination, said Dr. Whitfield, as he placed a hand on Dmitri's shoulder. Nothing to worry about. Dmitri just stared into empty space, his eyes filled with dread. They all arrived at the living quarters about an hour later. On the way over, Dmitri had listened to those recordings and couldn't make out anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps the others were right. Perhaps it was all just in his head. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen his imminent and unavoidable future. A slow and terrifying death, surrounded by darkness, trapped in an alien place. Chills ran down his spine. He lay himself on bed and quickly fell asleep. He couldn't wait to go back home. Later that night, Dmitri awoke to the sound of cold and hollow whispers in the darkness. He didn't bother turning on the light this time.
Vanessa, read by Tex Murphy. The hole in her chest is the size of a cigarette. I can see straight through it from where I sit, even with the smoke trails from my gun. 6 weeks of cheating husbands and damsels in distress. That's what it took to pay for that alpaca couch she's bleeding out on. I've done a bad thing, and it's only Wednesday. Her name was Vanessa Quinn, and she was an onomat, or so she said. I'm not sure I believe they exist. Even now, if she was an onomat, she wasn't anymore. She told me to shoot her, so I did. Onomats are supposed to have that power. They tell you to do something, and then you can't resist. Except I think I shot her because I wanted to. It's a long story. Bang, bang, bang. The office door shook with the knocking from outside. What a time for company. Had I been set up? I'd shot Vanessa, and now I was literally holding a smoking gun about to get caught. Wait a minute, I called towards the door. Think. Quickly pulling out the desk drawers, I searched for some kind of solution. A pretzel, a postcard, a pair of pickle-shaped cufflinks. And there it is, in the bottom drawer, the patchwork quilt Mom sent me over 2 Christmases ago. I was never going to see any other kind of action, so I throw it over Vanessa's body and open the door. It's almost too late before I realize I'm still holding the gun. But I quickly stuff it down the back of my pants. It's hot. Officer Peters looks me up and down. She's hot too, but not as hot as the gun in the back of my pants. I wince. Yes, officer? We've had a report of gunshots coming from this building. Didn't hear a thing, I tell her, smiling sheepishly. Mind if I take a look around? Oh, not at all, I say, letting her through. Her tour of the office takes about 5 seconds. 5 solar seconds. And then she finds... nothing. Something catches her eye. She runs her fingers across the back of my couch. Alpaca? I nod, worriedly. She nods appreciatively. Mind if I try? I protest as she sits down, but it's too late. She's definitely sitting on Vanessa's bleeding body. She's armed, so I'll need to be quicker, or maybe run. The window, I could jump, say 20 flights. It's soft, she says. It's then I realize Vanessa's body's gone. Just the throw remains. Still stroking the couch, she continues. Why do you keep the quilt on it? I'm in shock. It can get pretty dirty, I reply. Oh, I'll bet it does, she winks. So, I was wrong. Apparently the quilt could have some action after all, but not tonight. There was a corpse walking around somewhere, and it didn't have many places to hide. Officer Peter sighs. I'll get going then. Heading for the door, she turns around one last time. Be careful, she whispers. I'm really not supposed to say this, but the chief thinks there's an onomat on the loose. And when they get in your head, you can't get them out. Well, if I hear something, I'll let you know. No, you don't want to hear anything, not from an onomat. If you find one, shoot it. That's the only way to deal with them. That's how we deal with them. With that, she's gone. I shut the door firmly behind her and retrieve the gun firmly behind me. Believe me now? I know that voice. I turn and see Vanessa upright on the couch, just like before I shot her. I believe you, I say, looking at my gun, but I just shot you. You didn't shoot me, she smiles. I told you to think that you'd shot me, and you did. So, my alpaca couch, I ask hopefully. Well, the gunshot's real. The alpaca took it in the chest. I grimace. 6 weeks wasted. I knew I had a reason for wanting her dead. I point the gun at her and sneer. What do you want from me? I want you to help me make more onomats. I lower the gun. You mean like, babies? No, silly. I mean like this. She curls a finger to beckon me over. Come here. I move towards her, because I wanted to. It's your lucky day, she says. Yeah, you know what? She was right. I just got away with murder. It's my lucky day, I say. She places a softly scented palm on my forehead and whispers, because you're an onomat now. Yeah, because I'm an onomat now. She kisses me on the cheek and gives me a gentle push. Now, go and tell the chief.
Contagion by Ashley Van Hesteren. Read by Adam Day. The demon really did spread like a virus. Easier, probably. A virus needs contact. Shared air, a passing germ, a gentle touch. But this monster was not that limited. All this needed was an audience to be infectious. And it's so easy here. There's so much theatricality surrounding this demon, this ghost of a phenomenon, so much ritual, so much awful curiosity. It made infecting one after another as easy as walking down the street past the tree, past the bridge, past the nearly empty house, the field of stones. It started with one, the first domino to be pushed down. She was young. They usually are. They're easier to infect young. They listen. It took time for her fall, but the demon knew. Sooner or later she would, and there would be a tidal wave to feast upon, and this demon was nothing if not patient, ever present. Until the virus got her, until the sickness spread, the demon could only enjoy that girl trapped in his teeth, prepare for the moment, the tipping point when she would finally cut her strings and fly. There was a process to this. The young, susceptible, high-risk groups already have a home for the demon in their heart. Most people do anyway. A hollow home for the whispers to rest, implant, and grow the demon. The demon would grow stronger, too big for its stolen place, pushing lungs out of the way until breathing hurts. He whispers in the heart of his host until there would be nothing left, and only the fall could quiet him, and he could infect someone else. That girl, that first girl, she was no different. She was nearly there already without the demon's whispers. There was so little light left to feast on in her world, in her every moment of calm, every smile, every restful night. He tainted all of it. There was nothing left. And now it was just a waiting game. until she got to her lonely, nearly empty home every night, night after night. When she finally had enough of the burning in her chest, the weight on her shoulders, the pain from the demon's whispers around her hollowed out heart, he gave her a moment of peace. She made her decision, and the resolve soothed the scratches in her throat. She tried to reach out in that subtle human way. Of course she did. That's just nature. She knew where this sickness was going as easily as she could see the light at the end, and she was afraid as much as calm. "Take my ring," she'd say. "I know I love it, but I don't need it anymore. When I'm gone, Mom will take care of my cat. No one will miss me anyway." No one heard her. They never do. All humans don't want to die, but more than that, humans don't want to be in pain. So she succumbed to the sickness, or tried at least. Girls almost never get it right on the first try. Her red hair fanned out around her pillow as she laid back, holding the bottle above her, note on the pillow beside her, her final bedfellow. "Pills don't hurt, right?" She'd been like this that day, rationalizing to the demon parasite in her heart. "Of course they don't. You'll sleep, and it'll be over. What's it matter anyway?" "Yeah," and the bottle opened in her hands. "It'll be over. It'll be over. No longer a burden. No more pain. No more. No more." But of course there was more. Pills don't work very well. She'd only gotten sick, was taken to the hospital before the pills tore apart her liver. The doctors, the ones who cared enough to see the signs, helped her, or tried at least. And the demon was quieted for a while, until he wasn't. More time, and the girl tried again. Nothing got better for her. She tried again, rewrote the note, redid the demon's ritual, just different enough to work this time. The virus ready to spread. The blood stained the porcelain and he relished in it. The pain let go, finally, and that fed him too. She was dead. The demon had outgrown his host, gotten too big for her poor soul to bear, tore her apart and bled out with her, her true final bedfellow. But the virus wasn't quite spreading yet. That death alone couldn't start the contagion. It needed an audience. And they made it so easy. They paraded her face on posters, told her tragic story, painted the town red with her hair and her blood, satiated the awful curiosity of the audience, fed the other demons, gave them a bigger home, a louder voice, and let them spread. A boy this time. Good. They were more successful. After the first domino falls, the rest go quickly. Always. He was a football player. Big, loud, and sure. Good. He wouldn't take long. The demon knew it, and he didn't. The demons are already there. They just need ears to listen. It wasn't hard to make the boy listen after the first bell. No one would go to your funeral. You'd be better off. So would your father and sister. There was nothing here. A little lying goes a long way after the virus starts to spread. He only needed to write one letter. Only needed to walk to the bridge once. Stare over the river's flow with an empty kind of longing once. Like needing to go home after a long day of pain, finding the water below like you'd find the bed sheets at night. He was dead. The demon had outgrown his host, gotten too big for this poor soul to bear, tore him apart and drowned with him, tangled together in the water. They didn't make it as easy with that boy. They listened to the psychologists, but it was already too late. The demon didn't need each other. After the first domino was knocked to the dirt, the next was another boy, slight for his age, light enough to not snap the tree branch or his trachea. The note they found in his room led them down the street, past the bridge, past the empty house, to the forest. He was long dead when they found him. The demon had outgrown his host again, gotten too big for his poor heart to bear, tore him apart and choked with him, draped from the branches like flower pots hanging from a funeral home's ceiling. And yet more dominoes fell, landing at the heads of graves in the field of stones. Unstoppable, relentless waves eroding the people on shore until only the sand remained. The demon always spread like a virus from person to person, with no touch, no shared germ, no shared air, just an audience full of awful curiosity.
The sprinklers hiss down. I crawl out of Jimmy's upside-down Toyota, clutching his spare magazine. Need to count the bullets. 9. Just 9. 8 for Emma, and 1 for me. I kiss each bullet for luck as I reload them. Rising to my feet, I slide the magazine into the Smith & Wesson. Lockdown sirens blare, but the cavalry's not coming. Jimmy's already dead. I am the cavalry. Dr. Thatcher's black BMW is strewn on its side, engine crushed against the concrete wall. It's in far better shape than he is. I limp past the wreck towards the exit ramp. At the top, a reinforced steel wall now separates the lab's underground car park from the outside world. And with my back against it, I may have time to take all 8 shots before Emma reaches me. She's fast. Too fast for Jimmy to hit. She tore straight through his gut, pulling out his spine like an afterthought. I grabbed his gun and ran as she shredded the screaming lab techs like paper dolls. There's no way I'm dying like that. No way. If 8 bullets can't stop her, I'll eat the knife. Months ago, the eggheads on smoke break told Jimmy that the Emma project had failed. Gene pattern was unstable or some such bullshit. Sent down to the vault for further military evaluation, like the rest of Thacker's creations. She had already been here once. It was just a matter of time until she returns. I wade across the puddle gathering at the base of the ramp. My thumb caresses the safety, ensuring it's off. As I reach the steel wall, the garage plunges into total darkness. The sirens wheeze to a halt before my eyes can adjust. The emergency lighting kicks in. How the hell she managed that, I have no idea. The door from the west stairwell crashes open. I raise Jimmy's gun, but she's in cover before I can aim. She weaves her way around wrecked cars, drawing even closer. My first shot goes wide, but it's enough to send her sprinting directly for me. The second shot clips her side. The third misses. She vaults from the puddle at the base of the ramp, her hospital gown smothered in blood. The fourth hits her square in the chest. I put another there, and another. The seventh slows her approach to a stagger. The eighth forces her to her knees, just a few feet downslope. She raises her head and howls. Eyes locked, I put that ninth bullet straight through her skull. Spraying crimson, she spills backward onto the concrete slope. My legs fail, and I slide my back against the steel. Jimmy's empty gun falls to the floor. All that's left is my sobbing and the sprinklers. Until Emma slowly rises.
Lung. Read by Jesse Cox. She must be early 20s. The white robes barely cover her, soaked in blood. How very traditional, thinks Lung, lighting up another cigarette. Cough, cough, cough. The dais, if you can call it that, is a mossy slab beside Carnby Stream. The clouded sky picks out highlights in the water as it travels past jutting rocks and reeds. It's a calming juxtaposition to the lifeless vessel in front of him. Cough. Cough. Coughing violently and uncontrollably, Lung adds his own blood sample to the victim's. He drops a barely touched cigarette to the floor and squishes it with his boot heel. Wiping his mouth with a now bloodied sleeve, he reaches into his jacket for something. Another cigarette. Gotta find me a good one, he mumbles. After lighting up, he produces a phone from his jacket and hits a speed dial number. After a few rings, it's answered. Mrs. Hedges. I think I found her. It's not good, I'm afraid. Cough. Cough. Coughing up blood, the girl gurgles out a shriek and raises up from the dais. Although it may be, whispers Lung, before hanging up the phone. He steps backwards wearily, brandishing a revolver at the girl, and calls out, Hey, you! And then more worriedly, Who are you? Looking down at her semi-naked, blood-drenched body, the girl sighs and turns her attention to Lung. Did you murder her? Lung squirms a little. Cough. 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 A lot of people wanted Zoe dead. I did them a favor, and I got a meeting with you. The girl draws her robes tightly, steps off the dais, and moves slowly towards Lung. And what did you want exactly? Lung steps backwards in rhythm with the girl. I'm dying. I don't want to die. You said you could grant me eternal life. The girl snarls at him. I did. That was before I knew you were a killer. Her pace quickens. Cough. Cough. Coughing more blood, Lung swipes with his sleeves and stands his ground. Then you can go back to hell, or wherever it is you came from. Bang! 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 The bullets rip holes through her chest, and blood arcs ferociously from the wounds. She staggers with each impact, then begins to sprint at Lung. What the fuck? Lung crosses his arms to shield himself as the girl leaps onto him, crashing him backwards onto the grassy floor. Thud! Crunch! His head hits the angled stone with such force his eyes bulge. Blood pools behind him and in his mouth. You're mine now, the girl says, and reaches her hand into his chest, grabbing for something or letting something go. It only takes a second. A transfer of energy takes place that can only truly be visualized by travelers from a faraway dimension. Lung's eyes roll into the back of his skull. He stops moving. The stream flows smoothly in the distance. The girl reaches for something in Lung's jacket. The phone. She hits speed dial. Mom? It's Zoe. I know. It was the detective you hired. He tried to kill me. I know. As fast as I can. I love you too. Okay. Bye. She puts the phone back, and her hand stops. Shaking. It moves as if it has a mind of its own. She tries to resist the movement, but it's too strong. It darts into the jacket and pulls out a cigarette. She sighs as she lets it put the cigarette to her lips and lights it. Cough. Cough. Coughing like it's her first smoke. She looks down pitifully at Lung and shrugs. Gotta find me a good one.
Nightmares by Angela Atkins. Read by Jessa from the Jessa channel. I didn't know where she came from. I was driving along, playing with the radio, and all of a sudden there's this woman standing in front of my car. Naturally, I slammed on the brakes and attempted to swerve away from her, but I still felt the thump of solid body connecting with my car. There simply was no denying that sickening thump. When my car finally skidded to a full stop, I thought my heart would burst from my chest. It was pounding so hard. My hands trembled as I put the car in park, and I just sat there. The hum of the engine and a distorted voice from the now crackling speakers were my only company as I simply sat there. Everything in my head was screaming for me to go, to run. No one saw me. No one knew I even went for a drive. I could just run and, God forgive me, leave her there to be someone else's problem. But I couldn't do it. I had to know. I had to know if I had just killed this girl. So I took a deep breath and looked in my rear view mirror. The red glow of my brake lights illuminated the lump lying in the road behind me. A body. There was definitely a body. Run. Everything still screamed at me to flee. The feeling in your gut when you know something awful is going to happen and you need to get the fuck out of Dodge before you get caught up in it was raging in me, but here I was, unfastening my seatbelt and making myself open the car door. The interior lights came on and the annoying ding sounded to remind me that the keys were still in the ignition. I left my door open as I cautiously walked back towards a body that lay unnaturally twisted atop the pavement. I wanted to say I was breathing, but in all honesty, I think I was holding my breath, afraid to get a whiff of death. I was certain that it was a smell that would never let me sleep at night again. My legs felt like jello as I approached. One hand on the side of my car for support, the other outstretched in front of me, as if ready to catch myself when I inevitably passed out. I took a deep breath and lowered myself to the ground. Miss? My voice cracked and I cleared my throat, trying to retain the masculine depth that was currently hiding behind the remnants of puberty as fear swelled within me. Miss, are you okay? She lay on her back. Well, mostly on her back. Her legs were twisted onto her side, but her upper body was twisted, with her back flat on the road, face staring up into the sky. I saw her chest rise and fall. She was breathing, short and shallow breaths, but she was breathing. I looked her over. Her face was partially covered in bloody hair. I clasped my hand over hers, reassuring her as she lightly squeezed my hand. I spoke to her. Hang on, I'm going to call for help. Just please, don't die. I tried to stay calm as I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed. Her hand squeezed mine, just a little tighter, as I began to pull her hair away from her face. Her breath was becoming much more shallow, and her grip weakened. The operator answered after the second ring. Hello? What is your emergency? I hit a woman. It was dark. I didn't see her. I came around the curve and she was just there and I hit her and she's twisted weird and... My calm was unraveling. Sir, calm down. I could hear her typing what I was telling her. Where did this happen? I looked down at the girl as her chest stopped rising. Her eyes didn't blink and she no longer gripped my hand. I was gripping hers. I knew she was dead, but I still clung to her hand. Then she was gone. The blacktop rippled in front of me. It turned into waves that grew into a deeper and richer blue, like satin sheets, like satin bed sheets. In my car, I was driving on. I stopped and blinked a few times as I sat up in my bed, phone clenched tightly in my hand. Sir, where were you driving? What road was the accident on? I hung up. Sweat drenched my pajamas, and I was safe at home. My immediate reaction was to get up and run down to the garage to check my car. I was in such a rush that I let down the last 3 stairs and nearly killed myself as I jumped over the family dog sleeping in the kitchen doorway. I opened the door from the kitchen to the garage and flipped on the lights. I fell down in the doorway and cried. My car was there. It was pristine. It was just a nightmare. I was still on the floor, wiping my eyes as I saw the familiar red and blue lights reflecting through my kitchen window. This should be a fun thing to explain. I pulled myself to my feet and headed towards the door, ready to show the officers my car and prove that it wasn't real, just a vivid dream. But my stomach dropped as I opened the door. It had only been moments since I'd made the call. There was no way they made it out to my house that fast. I watched them walk up the driveway and see their mouths moving, but it takes a while to hear what they're saying. Do you understand? Your daughter's been in a fatal accident. I'm so sorry. It's only then I dropped the phone. I don't hear the metal frame thunk the ground or the glass shards that splinter from the screen, because at that moment, that very moment, she's with me again, gripping my hand tightly.
Mother, read by Brandy Clark. After Mother died, Penn started putting on weight. The pasty roll of fat that bulged over the waist of her jeans secretly pleased her. It was her own little fat roll. Look how big she'd grown. Wasn't she looking well? Part of her wanted to keep it, but she couldn't, not with how it mocked her. See, it said. Mother was right. You are fat. You can't be trusted. You need her. Penn tried. She really did. She starved herself. She'd done it before. She could do it again. Except before was different. Before, Mother was there. Giving up, are we? She said, as Penn reached for a slice of bread. I wouldn't if I were you, if Penn even thought about opening the fridge. Then, it had been easy to stay thin. Now, without Mother, Penn failed like she failed everything else. By lunchtime, she'd cut a small square of cheese because she was weak. By late afternoon, she'd taken one of Mother's favorite lemon biscuits and ate it in her bedroom like she was 13 again, sucking on stolen sauce packets from the school canteen. It wasn't her fault. It was too hard. The gnawing emptiness of the house was bad enough without the gnawing in her stomach. Still, all this proved one thing. Penn still needed her mother. The first appointment at the clinic cost most of Mother's jewelry. Then there was the vessel to pay for. That cost Penn her books and a few items of clothing. Even so, a human vessel was out of the question. Animals were cheaper. Bigger ones cost more, but only one kind would do. The African gray was a good fit for Mother. They had the same beady eyes, the same smug expression, the same petulant squawks. Penn didn't bother with a cage. She didn't need one. The bird took up a perch on the back of Mother's armchair, watching her with talonous disapproval. The sight of the bird's claws, her mother's claws, piercing the chair's upholstery, pierced Penn's eyes. She didn't have to try anymore, or fail anymore. She just had to do as she was told, like the good girl she always was. Look at the baby, the parrot squawked. Poor baby Penn, cry baby Penn, pull yourself together. And just like that, Penn pulled herself together. After a couple of weeks, Pen's little fat roll shrank away, like an attic mouse she'd foolishly dreamed of keeping. In truth, the parrot was better at being mother than Mother had been. It was the sharper eyesight, perhaps. When Pen stole a breadcrumb from the kitchen counter, the parrot saw. "Can't even resist a crumb," it sang. "What a joke you are!" In 2 months, Pen grew thinner than she'd ever been. Thinner and harder. There were no more soft little rolls of fat to make her tender. Just thin skin and hard bones. And then, after a while, not even that.
The Bag Lady by David F. Schultz, read by Venomous Platypus. Breathing seems so loud when you want to stay hidden. Time oozed like molasses, cowering in the closet, peering through the crack. It floated there in the center of the loft. The Bag Lady. If it moved on, maybe escape was possible, but it just floated in the middle of the empty room, eerily silent. The vacant penthouse had a hallucinatory quality. Dimly lit in blue, through the tall glass windows that spanned the wall were many distant pinpricks of white, the lights of the city. It was cold. The room gave the impression of a fish tank, with twilight blue through the long windows and the Bag Lady floating, as if suspended in currents of unseen water. The Bag Lady changed form, not just undulations of hair or clothes, but a subtle morphing. The robes were fish scales, briefly, but again, becoming cloth. Bedraggled hair was seaweed, then tentacles, each topped with an eyeball, only they weren't, except for a moment. The head was a monstrous mouth of some deep-sea horror, ringed with row on row of teeth, too impossibly large to fit in the room, and yet, there it was, until it wasn't. Altering its form like camouflage, playing with the images and thoughts all called from its victims. There it floated, and then it turned to face me. Run or die, the door gave way from the stumbling push, and there was a long expanse of the room. Footsteps echoed on wood, the spinal shiver of pursuit up by a nightmare. A cold gaze grasped at my back. The air was thickened mud. Limbs slowed with each straining step. And then, stuck. I accepted my fate, hoped it would be over quickly. A blink, and there it was, clutching my shoulders with spider-like fingers. Black, eyeless sockets led straight into its mind. A cold, dark tunnel, and at the bottom a mirage. Those teeth, that carnivorous circular maw, closing down like a spiked coffin. The vision vanished, and an alternative to death was offered. It wouldn't eat me, at least for now. It needed help with its camouflage. A human mind to wear, like a shell for a hermit crab. I agreed to help the Bag Lady with its disguise. Yes, I agreed to help. I thought to the Bag Lady that it will do no good for its disguise to float, since human beings don't float, except in water, and its disguise would be less unsettling if it had eyes, and were less of a corpse. But the entity did not understand the concept of water or air, floating or standing, living or dead. These things were all alien to it and meaningless. Its present form was an approximation of its first victim, a homeless lady named Bethany. Bethany had lived a life of addiction, survived on a steadily dwindling income from prostitution as age, drugs, and street life took their toll on her market value. Until she ended up in the clutches of the entity in an empty penthouse lair, and the entity had devoured her and taken her form with a horrifying loss of fidelity. The disguise was decomposed, Not decomposing flesh, but decomposing reality. A twisted amalgam of fears and haunting memories. A corporeal phantasm of nightmares, fraying at the edges. The bag lady. Without the capacity to understand human perception, the entity was blind to the weakness of its present disguise, but had other uses for me. Spidery fingers wrenched open my jaw, fingers with far too many segments which traced along the sides of my face and into my mouth, stretching it wide. The bag lady gapped its bile-stained mouth over my own and regurgitated a worm-like thing, no thicker than its fingers, but longer. Involuntary gags, reflexive struggling, as the worm wriggled around my tongue and throat coated with mucus, probed. The worm didn't go down, but up into my nasal cavity, and then up further until it was crawling inside my brain. Panic, panic! And gradually, as the worm settled, panic made way for dread. The worm was inside my skull, inside my brain. The bag lady drifted back to the center of the room and floated there. I was free to go, along with the worm, to observe for the bag lady, to do its bidding. It would eat me if I refused, perhaps starting with my brain, though it hadn't yet decided, and was curious about starting with feet. So I left and observed for the bag lady as I went, and relayed my thoughts through the worm. A new life with the bag lady's worm inside my brain. Small talk with the servers at the restaurant. Not this one, the worm had to be told incessantly. Not these ones, the worm had to be told as people strolled past on the sidewalk. Not this one, the worm had to be told when talking with coworkers and asset management. I looked into the eyes of the people I spoke with, and they looked into mine. And the worm looked at us both, increasingly impatient. And maybe the people sensed it, sensed something was wrong, just behind my eyes, but they didn't comprehend the true horror. The bag lady was getting hungry. "Spare some change?" a homeless man said. He wore torn clothes, held a cardboard sign in hand, and smelled of urine. The worm probed, and the worm did not hear the usual refrain. Not this one. What's special about this one? The answer was nothing, which may have been precisely the point. How about something to eat, I said, or the worm said, or somehow both, together. A jingle of coins, a handful of change to buy him a coffee, and a conversation. A talk about his life, and to find that his name was George. George had lost his job and his family and couldn't work because of pinched nerves, or so he said. Perhaps his story was embellished for panhandling, but the worm didn't care. The worm insisted that the bag lady was waiting for me to demonstrate my usefulness, or else be eaten tonight. So George found out that there was a great place he could sleep, better than the street or the shelters, a building with a vacant penthouse. George wanted to know if I was the owner, so I said yes, which is true in a way. And we went to the top floor of that building, to the empty penthouse lair, to the room bathed in blue light, with the glass walls like a fish tank, where the city sleeps below, unaware of what lurks above them, where the floating entity waits inside for those who keep finding their way, like a deep-sea fish dangling its lure. The bag lady appeared and changed forms, and the screams lasted just a moment, maybe a fraction of a second, before George was gone. Then the bag lady floated there, silent and saddened, while I watched from the crack of the closet. I always watch from inside the closet.